I'm going to start bringing in the other seminar members, but I'm going to let Tracy, Pam, and Jason to say like a brief response. If you take 10 minutes each, then that'll be the night. And that's probably not what we want, but I want you to have an opportunity to respond because you put a lot of thought in this and got a ton of feedback. So Tracy's first.
So I just make two quick comments. One is that, and Nathan referred to this, and I think Richard Ward made a comment in the. I'm still going through the comments. I haven't read all of them yet, but we might have to add another quadrant because the other difference is a live telling and a virtual live telling. That's a very different kind of way to make eye contact, and it can be. I mean, the only place we have to look to make eye contact is the green dot, and that can become really intimidating. It can be very engaging as well, but it can become very intimidating. Whereas if you're in real person, you can be scanning the audio, making eye contact with a variety of people, and so you still feel like, okay, eye contact's being made, but it's not necessarily with me the whole time. On the camera, it's with you the whole time, as well as everybody else the whole time. So that's a very different kind of dynamic to consider as well, and something that we need to be looking at, because this isn't going to go away even when things go back to quote unquote normal. So it is good to be exploring that and dealing with that.
Amen.
So the other thing I wanted to say, it is so funny, Peter, believe it or not, you mentioned my big space here. I felt cramped in this space. So yeah, really. So I often use a definition of storytelling by Donald Davis, saying that, and I make it more of a digital. I adapt it a little bit. He talks about the storyteller sees a picture in their mind that they want the audience to see. So the storyteller uses everything in the storyteller's or the performer's toolbox, voice and body, to try to paint that picture on their mind. I like to say project a movie, because it's not just a static two-dimensional picture. It's even though movies on a screen are still sort of somewhat two-dimensional, but anyway, and there are challenges with that as well. So I think that some of the comments for Pam. The first one, we were able to see more of her body, so she was able with her body to paint the picture or project the movie more than when the second one, when she was closer up, although that was more intimate for some people. And for me, that's why I like to have space. I'm having to learn to pull back, because if I had my druthers, I wanted as much space as possible to be able to create the picture for the audience, because I think that is an important part of what we're trying to do. So,
Pam?
Yeah, Tracy was talking about some of the stuff that I'd put in kind of a longish comment several minutes ago in the chat, whether or not, these chat comments, they go by so fast, we might catch some and miss a whole bunch of others. But I think this would be a very different endeavor were we to attempt to explore, theatricality versus what storytelling and not, if we were in person, because this mediates everything that we're doing. And so I actually found it, I was frustrated in preparing for this. It felt also really artificial for me. And I'm not sure if that would be any different in an in-person context, to try to identify, okay, what's more theatrical, but my storytelling, I think good storytelling does include lots of stuff that is theatrical. So I was all over the place in my own brain in terms of how to prepare for this and what would be identified as one way or the other. So what I ended up doing to both welcomed and unwelcomed response was really playing a lot with the storytelling that I've had to do in the last year, which is through this camera. And I've been playing with proximity to the camera. So I was very conscious that I was making that choice, that my more storytelling, less theater telling was showing less of my body and trying to engage with proximity to the camera. So I had overlapping of different concerns and questions, and was actually rather frustrated a lot of my preparation time. But I appreciate every word of all the feedback for all that we're doing. This is great. Thanks, everybody.
Jason?
Yeah, just a shout out to Dennis Dewey and Tim Coombs. Both of them separately led workshops back in the first decade of this century on, marrying images and story. And so since Phil kind of gave us free reign and said, "I trust you," I thought I'd shift to, shift for the second telling. So it was less theatrical, I guess I should say, I didn't think of it as a binary of theatrical and storytelling, but more like, well, I'll storytell and then I'll storytell in a different way. Yeah, I like the way Richard said it in the comments. He said I averted my eyes in the second telling, which is such a Richard Swanson thing to say. And it's also beautiful because it's very theological. I didn't think I was doing that. I shared my screen earlier today as I was teaching a class, and it's like, when you share your screen, the idea is nobody's looking at me. That's why I'm doing it, y'all. I'm not looking at you. Why would I be looking at you? Look at the images. So that was kind of my thinking. But yeah, so that's what I got. Let's go to the floor.
All right, I can only recognize, we have exactly 20 people, so I can see everybody's box on the screen, but of course, if you don't have your camera on, I can't see you. And so you are dead to me in terms of participation. So, so it's a little bit of we have 23 minutes left, a little bit of a free for all. Something that you want to say, just give me a wave, and I will do my best to make sure everybody who waves at me gets a chance to speak. Richard Swanson.
I found this fascinating. Thank you, each and all. The thing that, when Megan said theater is about more than one body, this seems to me absolutely crucial, and that seems to be the thing that I've maybe learned most about in the last 20 years. But the thing that I'm finding myself thinking about watching and creating theater on the screen these days is the piece that I find myself needing to replicate is that thing that happens when one body touches another body, or when one body looks at another body. There is an electric thing that the audience immediately feels. And I was intrigued by each of the ways you attempted that. Pam's powerful approach to the camera creates that same hair stands up in the back of your neck moment that happens when two bodies on stage touch each other at a crucial moment. And having just finished working with some workshop scenes out of my translation of Medea, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how to make theater happen when all of the actors were two-dimensional and looked like the Brady Bunch. And that's exactly what we spent time working on. That replication of the electric moment of touch or eye contact between actors is the thing that makes theater. How do you do that when eye contact is, in order to make eye contact with you, I cannot look at you.
Joanna.
I'm on Pam's, and particularly her second one. I too was overwhelmed by it. When you were so close, all I could think of is, will you look away from the green dot? I didn't feel that I was being looked at. I felt that you were hyper-focused on the green dot. Now, this may be me, but it's not a reaction I've ever had to your live storytelling. So.
Just a response. Everyone be aware that green dot is PC exclusive. I think it's only Apple things. I have no green dot.
Okay, well, you're staring at wherever your little arrows are telling you the camera is.
And you're saying that that's not what you experienced, Joanna?
What
Like,
I experienced was move your eyes. It felt like you were hyper focused
Mm-hmm.
on one spot. That pushed me back, which is never a reaction I've had to Pam's storytelling. And I've heard quite a lot of it through, yeah, I think I've seen a couple of others on Zoom too, but not dominantly alive. Yes.
Elizabeth, I saw your hand.
Yes, I want to say to Pam and to everybody that it was interesting when you made in your comments afterwards that you said you were frustrated. I think I picked that up because when I saw you before, I was telling everybody I could see about this wonderful storyteller, and you were different tonight, and of course I'm different every night too. So, but it would be interesting if, and I know this is true with students when I'm giving a lecture, if I don't feel quite on top of things for the lecture, they pick that up. So maybe I picked up part of your struggle.
Cliff.
Yeah, I think the connection to teaching, reference to teaching, Elizabeth, is making me think that having to teach in this kind of format, I have found myself over emoting because I'm trying to get that reaction from my audience, right? That I'm used to when we're in a live setting, and it's exhausting as a teacher, and I imagine it might be exhausting for my students as well, right? And I think that was I want to clarify, I'm not saying that I found your performances exhausting, any of the three of you tonight, but I know some of the comments, your comments, Elizabeth, maybe yours, Joanna, about the intensity of the emotion that's coming through. I think as performers, this medium encourages us to over emote. And then the fact that we're so close to the faces as we're watching as an audience, then it increases the intensity of the way that we receive that in certain ways. So I wonder if that's not contributing to what's happening.
I think Megan said something like that too, right? In terms of like theater, if you're in theater, that's what you're over emoting because you're so far away from the audience, right?
Yeah, I was sort of talking about how like, and there's different theatrical styles, but for a lot of the times, like if you, and especially like, I mean, and there's like, you know, you have cheesy musicals where you're going to be way more over the top than like very serious, like realistic style dramas, but you always have to be like slightly more extra than you need to be in life, even in a realistic drama, largely just because like, you know, the acting teachers always tell you act to the person in the last row of the theater, so they are getting the same experience, which then means if you're at a show where Jonathan Groff is in it, you get covered in spit if you're in the front row, but that's a very specific. So like there's this difference of like audience experience depending on where in the space you are, and so I had thoughts about like the construction and existence of space, where like our spaces at this point, like we've all seen sort of the backgrounds of each other. I know Tracy picked a new one, but like I know that's what Pam's background looks like because I've been in enough chats with her and like watched her tell enough times that sort of it's like this sort of you only have as much space as you have to work with, where theatrical style necessitates a larger space.
Well, and we're in a new, I just feel like we're in a new era. Nathan said it, like we're doing a new tradition on Zoom. Everybody who told today, everybody who's ever told on Zoom, we mostly just learned how to tell on Zoom the last year, right? So, I mean, we don't know what we're doing still, and we're trying to like, I think a lot of this is trying to figure out, I'm fascinated by the different ways that people are engaging with the camera and different ways that y'all are responding to, because I think this is just something brand new. This is a new way of communicating.
Tom, and then Chuck, you're next.
You're muted.
Tom, you're muted. Tom, unmute.
Thank you. The people have talked about this. I found the differences in the telling were significantly related to the dynamics. What I don't know, in Wayne Booth's analysis, dynamics of aesthetic distance. So there's the distance between the storyteller and the characters who the storyteller is presenting. And in, so Brecht is an interesting case. He advocated that an actor would put distance between themselves and the character that they're presenting so that they can observe and point to their character. Whereas Aristotelian drama flourished on the identification, the deep identification, Stanislavski method of the actor with the characters. There was a lot of difference. So the other dynamic of distance was the distance between the storyteller and the audience. And that's what was affected most by this digital medium, which is so intensely interactive in relation to audience address. And so what I hear Joanna and Elizabeth asking for is a little distance. Give me a chance. You know, give me some space where I'm not being absolutely, totally engaged. So I think that in this discussion of storytelling versus and theater, that one of the categories that would be helpful and just to pay attention to is the dynamics of distance in the various relationships within the story, the storyteller to the audience, the storyteller to the characters, so on. So that was fun.
Chuck, then Phil, then Mark.
First of all, I appreciate again everybody's presentation. I'm always in awe of you and your work. I was really struck by a combination of things. We talked about two major kinds of storytelling tonight. And then you talked also about the newness of Zoom. And it made me more aware and alert to thinking through the question of all kinds of storytelling from ancient times to now, especially in biblical times, all kinds of persuasion and rhetoric in every kind of circumstance with any kind of audience, whether it's one person or a small group to a large group as in a theater, or to a small group, or to one-on-one in conversations, whether it was a person in their community doing a community service like they're advocating for something in public, or maybe it's a slave convincing somebody who's a slave owner or a fellow slave as to something that needs to be conveyed by being persuasive in a nugget of a story they might tell. Or it might be a conversation or a story whose purpose is not so much to tell the story, but to evoke the story of the listener so that the storyteller is actually doing more listening than telling. And so I'm looking at all the dynamics that are possible, all the psychological circumstances, and all of the environmental and interaction circumstances. And the fact that you were describing this today by virtue of mixing it up with Zoom in addition to the two categories you mentioned was very mind-opening as to all the dimensions of storytelling and persuasion that might be going on in every time up until now, and the times we are in now that are sort of reminiscent of other shifts in storytelling capability and storytelling circumstances.
Some of what I wanted to say is going on in the chat in any case, that just to remind you, if you weren't a storyteller, you might not realize they were not seeing anybody. So you were feeling over-connected and they were unconnected because of it being set up as a webinar. They could see the face of the other storytellers, perhaps, but not if they were looking at the dot. They couldn't get feedback for you. And so that whole circuit was short-circuited by me. Mark.
Yes, this was really fascinating, seeing all the varieties of responses here. A couple of things that struck me as I was trying to step back and evaluate here a little bit. One, I found it, and maybe I'm with Elizabeth there, that the more melodramatic it was, sort of further I felt from the storyteller. I had to keep somehow creating more distance in a way here so that I became more of a viewer rather than a interacting participant. And the other thing I found is that the more that the emotion was communicated, the narrower the range of interpretation I had as a hearer of the story. I think Mark is, trying to engage and wants the reader to be asking questions involving But when the storyteller is communicating so much, they say it sort of, I felt like it narrowed my possibilities of response.
Tracy?
Just to respond to that, I mean, you experienced what you experienced, so I can't say no, that's not what you experienced. But I find a piece by Doug Littman, where he's talking about the most important thing, identifying what the most important thing is that you want to communicate. And he suggests, and I have found this to be powerful, that the stronger you are in communicating that, which often involves an emotion or, whatever, it seems like you're sort of banging everybody over the head and saying, this is what you need to, and it's very narrow and you can't. And yet what he suggests, and I have found this to be true, is that if you are very clear in what you're communicating, what you are doing is providing a very solid foundation from which the audience can then jump into the story themselves. If you are not clear, what you're providing is basically a waterbed with no baffles, and so it's not a firm foundation at all. So they have a very difficult time jumping into the story themselves. And one real quick example, years ago I did a presentation of Genesis 1. Actually, I did it for this group in our early years, where I rewrote the Genesis 1. I put images with it and music. And I was very clear with my rewriting that to emphasize how good the diversity of creation was. So I played this whole thing, and afterwards I asked my class of 8 or 10 students, what did you notice? What stuck out? And not a one of them said diversity is good, but they all had really wonderful other things that had stuck out to them. And when they finished sharing, I said, now if you had to guess what the most important thing for me was, or what I was specifically trying to communicate, what would you say? Oh, diversity is good. I mean, like they all got that, they all knew that. But it was the clear communication of that allowed them to then explore their thoughts. So again, I can't say that that's not what you experienced, Mark, but I have found the opposite to be very effective, and the exact opposite experience.
Megan?
Yeah, and I also think the idea of having a specific intention, whether that's like exactly what the audience gets or not, it grounds the performer in a way that makes them more easy to read, as opposed to feeling wishy-washy. Often audiences, even if they pick up on what you're trying to say and they vehemently disagree with it, that's still an emotional response that is valid as an audience member. But it's hard to have emotional responses to like mashed potato wishy-washiness. So I think in some sense, like, I think performers making choices about what they want to happen is one thing. If performers get really hung up on, did the audience get it? That's another thing. But then it also depends on the performer audience dynamic. Is it in a classroom where you're a professor and you need them to get the thing that you were trying to get to? Or is it like supposed to be some sort of thought-provoking dramatical piece where maybe the fact that the options are open is more okay? But that goes into genre and thoughts of audience and performer dynamics, which I think is weird when we're doing these thought experiments, because we're sort of like suspending what our audience is. I know like we're like, we got like Network of Biblical Storytellers folks watching in, but like we're all here for like specific purposes and similar thoughts. I'm getting rambly, so I'm gonna leave it there. But yeah, I guess, yeah.
I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anyone that's an observer or anyone at all wants to communicate with me, that's a way you can do that for feedback, because there's not time for everyone to speak. I found interesting in the chat some conversation about when you're in an audience, you're not just interacting with yourself. And so if the person is being a little like too riveted on you, you could turn to your person with you and break that intensity somewhat yourself, and that the other people are drawing you in by their responses or making you more attentive to your own responses by the way they're responding. And so audience usually in our experience is a communal experience and not and that gets fragmented a great deal in what we're doing. It'd be interesting to like have found out who are the introverts and who are the extroverts, the outgoing people and the ingoing people, and how that also affected the different approaches to engagement. We have about 5 minutes left, so if you're holding out till the end is near.
End is nigh.
I have another thing too, but oh, Elizabeth, you can go.
Well, this is just my own situation. I'm giving a long Zoom lecture on Saturday, and I was thinking, well, this will be, you'll get me up for that. Boy, it's made me really depressed because of the difficulties. And I've already been feeling the difficulties. How can you give a lecture to people that you see as little postage stamps for a moment, and then you don't see if you're sharing your screen? Yeah, it's hard. So I have a feeling that I will either overwhelm or underwhelm most of my audience. I admire you for all the skills that you have brought to this, all the people who've performed. It's just clear that you've been doing this for years and have so much to draw on. And I'm glad it's you guys who are going to be figuring out how to do this on Zoom. You kind of figured it out in front of us, but at least the right people are figuring it out, because these are the people who've figured out so much else. So thank you for that.
If you have the information on that workshop.
Yeah, I was thinking of putting it in, but it seems rather anticlimactic. But
well, if anyone would like to hear
I could put
Elizabeth to do 2 presentations on the Gospel of Mark.
No storytelling.
Not
Just
storytelling.
boring
And
lecture.
then followed by 2 by John Dominic Crossan. She'll put the link up there, and I believe it's free, and it's St. Andrews. Is that right?
No, it's sponsored by St. Luke's Episcopal Church, East Hampton, Long Island.
So it's if she can locate it before you sign off, you can grab that information and pursue it. Jason.
So I just think there might be something also in how we're encountering Zoom. Like on the user end, I never watch speaker view. Like when we had the 4 of us, I had the 4 of us in a quadrant, you know? Quadrant, that sounds familiar. But like, I almost had that sense that you're talking about, Phil, in terms of, yeah, I mean, Pam was getting pretty intense in that second story, which I know was part of it. But like, I could look at Tracy because she was watching the same story I was. So I don't know, maybe there's a piece of like, to your point, Elizabeth and Joanna and others, like, yeah, the speaker view is intense. Like right now I'm looking at a lot of different little boxes on the screen. And I led a class this morning that I shared my screen for more than half of it. I prefer that mostly because I don't want people looking at my wonderful face. Like I'd rather us be looking at an image together, but then your point is, yeah, I'm not seeing any of them, so I'm not getting any of their verbal feedback. It is hard. I feel like Zoom is this constant, we're just trying out the best we can. And there's always like, it's the lesser of 2 evils. It's the best thing we can do. It's incredible what we can do. And it's also still tricky.
I think that's probably a good note to end on. Thank you to everybody who's shown up and put themselves out there, or either visually or storytelling, especially our storytellers and our feedback people. And all the observers, we appreciate you and how much you filled the chat. I'm saving that so people can have access to that if I can. How come I can't? Oh, save chat. For those who are in the seminar, we want to do a couple more of these for sure before the next event. So if anyone has an idea of something they would like to pull off, please let me know, and I'll be happy to do. I would be happy to turn facilitating over to somebody else, but I'm also happy to facilitate and run the tech for something that you kind of think through and come up with a schema for. So you can use my email too. I'll just put it in there one more time. Oh no, I won't.
Hey, Phil, I'm happy to moderate sometimes, like if
Okay.
there's a rotating list.
All right, cool. We good? Well, it's good to see everyone's faces that I got to see. Love you all.
Thank
And
you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see your faces.